I'm inviting her to be with my son. You can't even have kids, Sharon, can you?" Nancy's voice cut through the air like a knife. My heart pounded, and I could feel my face flush with a mixture of anger and shame. I glanced at Kyle, hoping for a flicker of support, but he sat silently beside the younger woman, Diana, with a quiet acceptance in his eyes. "Nancy, this is not the time or place," I managed to say, my voice quivering despite my best efforts to stay composed. We were seated around the lavish dining table in the Benson's sprawling Pasadena estate, the room suffused with an uncomfortable tension. Nancy leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "We have to face reality, Sharon. Kyle deserves to be happy, and Diana here could make him a father." I stole another look at Kyle, but he remained stoic, his gaze focused somewhere in the distance. Diana, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly aware of the awkwardness, but not willing to challenge Nancy. "I can't believe you're just sitting there, letting her talk to me like this," I said to Kyle, my voice breaking. He finally looked at me, but there was no warmth, no reassurance in his eyes. "Sharon, we've talked about this," he said softly. "This is about the future." "Whose future?" I demanded. "Certainly not ours." Nancy leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "Sharon, our family has a legacy to uphold. It's not just about you and Kyle. It's about the Bensons' name and standing." My mind raced. The Bensons had always prided themselves on their social status. Affluent, influential, respected. But at what cost? I had sacrificed so much to fit into their world, and here Nancy was, ready to cast me aside the moment I couldn't fulfill their so-called legacy. "I can't do this," I said, pushing away from the table. The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. I turned and walked out of the room, each step feeling heavier than the last. Stepping outside, I found myself in the garden, the cool evening air hitting my face. The tears I had held back now flowed freely. This wasn't just about a family legacy, it was about my worth, my identity, and everything I had believed in. A moment later, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path behind me. I wiped my tears hastily, not wanting to look weak. Kyle appeared, his expression conflicted. "Sharon, please," he began. "Please what, Kyle?" I interrupted. "Please accept your mother's plan to replace me because I can't give her a grandchild?" "I don't know what you expect me to do," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Nancy's always been controlling, but she's also right about the pressure we're under." "She's tearing us apart, Kyle," I said, trying to make him see the reality. "Is this what you want, to replace me without even giving us a real chance?" He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I just want what's best for everyone." "You mean what's best for Nancy and her precious legacy," I spat. "But what about me, Kyle? What about us?" Kyle ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "I don't know, Sharon. I'm just trying to navigate this the best I can." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Navigate? You've been silent while your mother and Diana plot to replace me. That's not navigating, that's surrendering." He reached out, his hand brushing my arm, but I pulled away. "I can't do this alone, Kyle. If you won't stand up for us, for me, then what's the point?" He sighed heavily but said nothing more. The silence between us spoke volumes. As I walked back into the house to gather my things, a painful clarity washed over me. This was a battle I had to fight on my own, whether Kyle stood by my side or not. And if I had learned anything from Nancy's ruthless games, it was that sometimes you had to build your own strength and reclaim your story, one painful step at a time. The next morning, the tension from last night still hung in the air like a storm cloud. I sat at the breakfast table, trying to gather my thoughts. Nancy walked in, her presence filling the room with an air of superiority. "Sharon," she began, her voice sweet but with an edge. "I've been thinking. We need to consider the future. A guest house attached to the main property seems like a perfect solution, don't you agree?" I looked up, unprepared for this. "A guest house? For whom?" "For future guests, of course," she said dismissively. "Like Diana. She'll need a place to stay when she visits." My heart sank. Diana was already being treated like part of the family. How could Nancy be so bold? "And who will pay for this guest house?" I asked, my voice trembling with frustration. Nancy smiled, a predatory grin that made my blood boil. "We've already discussed it. You and Kyle will contribute significantly. After all, it's for the future of the family." "Discussed it?" I asked, my voice rising. Kyle never mentioned this to me. Nancy cocked her head, feigning innocence. Oh, he didn't? Maybe he thought you'd be against it. I clenched my fists under the table. This was another scheme to undermine me, to chip away at my role in this family. Kyle walked in and sensed the tension immediately. What's going on? He asked, looking between Nancy and me. Your mother seems to think we should build a guest house, I said, my voice barely controlled. Oh, right, Kyle said, avoiding my eyes. I thought I told you. No, Kyle, you didn't. Frustration and hurt welled up inside me. When did you decide this without me? Sharon, it's not a big deal, Kyle replied weakly. It's just a guest house. Not a big deal. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't about a guest house. It's about you letting your mother control our lives. Our future. Nancy watched with a smug expression, reveling in the chaos she'd sown. Now, Sharon, let's not be dramatic. It's just practical. Practical? I repeated, incredulous. Or just another way to push me out? Kyle sighed, rubbing his temples. Can't we just talk about this calmly? I shook my head in disbelief. There's nothing left to talk about if you're not willing to stand up for us, for me. The room fell silent. I looked at Kyle, hoping against hope he would finally stand by my side. But his silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. Fine, I said, my voice breaking. If that's how you feel, then do whatever you want. But don't expect my help either financially or emotionally. Turning on my heel, I walked out of the room, the weight of betrayal heavier than ever. With each step, my resolve hardened. If Nancy wanted a fight, she would get one. And this time, I wouldn't be the one to back down. Weeks passed by, filled with an uneasy silence between Kyle and me. We spoke only when necessary, the house echoing with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Nancy continued her schemes, now more brazen with Diana's frequent visits. One morning, as I stood in the kitchen making coffee, I felt an odd sensation. Dizzy, I grabbed the counter for support. The room spun and nausea welled up inside me. I took a deep breath, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. Later that day, I decided to see my doctor. Sitting in the sterile room, I felt a mix of dread and hope. Was it possible that? Dr. Harris walked in with a smile. Sharon, I have some news for you. You're pregnant. The words took a moment to sink in. Pregnant. After all the turmoil, this news felt like a beacon of hope. Back home, I found Kyle in his office. Kyle, we need to talk, I said, my voice unsteady with excitement. He looked up wary. What is it, Sharon? I'm pregnant, I said, unable to keep the smile off my face. For a moment, I saw a flicker of emotion pass through his eyes. Relief? Happiness? I couldn't tell. That's great news, he said finally, but his tone lacked the enthusiasm I'd hoped for. We're going to have a baby, Kyle. This changes everything, I said, hoping he would understand the significance. Yeah, it does, he agreed, but the words seemed hollow. News of the pregnancy spread quickly. Nancy was surprisingly elated, her demeanor suddenly softer. Sharon, darling, this is wonderful news, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. A baby changes everything. Our legacy is secure. I should have been thrilled by her approval, but instead, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Nancy's plans were always self-serving. As the months passed, Nancy's manipulations grew subtler but more invasive. She constantly hinted at how Kyle should think about the future, about the baby's role within the family. It was clear she saw the baby as another pawn in her games. One evening, I overheard a conversation between Nancy and Kyle in the living room. Kyle, you must ensure Sharon is on board with our plans for the baby. We need to think about the Bensons' future, she said. Kyle sighed. Mom, Sharon's been through enough. Can't we just be happy and support her? Nancy's voice hardened. Support her? This isn't just about her. The baby is our future. Sharon needs to fall in line with that. That was the last straw. I stepped into the room, my anger boiling over. Nancy, this baby is our child, not a bargaining chip for your legacy. Nancy's eyes narrowed, but she maintained her composure. I am thinking of the family, Sharon. Don't forget, you're part of this family too. I haven't forgotten, I replied coldly. But this is my baby, our baby, and I won't let you manipulate Kyle or me anymore. Kyle looked between us, clearly conflicted. Sharon, let's just try to work this out calmly. Calmly? I repeated, unable to contain my frustration. How can I be calm when your mother is trying to control every aspect of our lives? Nancy's facade dropped, her true nature revealing itself. Perhaps if you were more cooperative, things would be easier for everyone. I think it's time you leave, I said, my voice firm. You've meddled enough in our lives. This is our family, and we'll make our own decisions. Nancy's expression hardened, but she said nothing as she turned and left. Kyle looked at me, torn. Sharon, I don't know what to do. Support me, I said, tears welling up. Support our baby. Stand by us, Kyle. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the man I once loved. But only time would tell if that glimmer could lead us through the shadows Nancy had cast over our lives. The days that followed were filled with cautious optimism. Nancy kept her distance, and Kyle made an effort to be more supportive. But the fragile peace didn't last long. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, a sharp pain shot through my abdomen. I gasped, clutching the edge of the table for support. Kyle rushed to my side. Sharon, what's wrong? I don't know, I said, my voice strained. It hurts, Kyle. It hurts so much. Panic set in as the pain intensified. Kyle helped me to the car, and we hurried to the hospital. Each minute felt like an eternity. At the hospital, the nurses quickly took me to a room. Kyle paced outside while I was examined, his face pale with worry. After what felt like hours, the doctor came out. Kyle approached him, anxiety etched on his face. Doctor, is she all right? Is the baby okay? The doctor's expression was grave. I'm sorry, Mr. Benson. Your wife had a miscarriage. Kyle staggered, his world collapsing. I lay in the hospital bed, numb. The words echoed in my mind, but it didn't feel real. How could this happen? It wasn't fair. Back home, the grief was overwhelming. Kyle was distant, retreating into himself. I felt alone, abandoned in my sorrow. Nancy came over, her presence as unwelcome as ever. She didn't offer comfort. Instead, she sat with Kyle, discussing the future. Kyle, we have to focus on what's next, she said, her voice calm. You can't let this setback keep you from the big picture. Kyle glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Mom, now is not the time. Sharon needs support. I'm thinking of her too, Nancy insisted. She'll be all right, but we need to make decisions about the future. Her words were a stark contrast to the emptiness I felt. Days turned into weeks. The void left by the miscarriage was a constant reminder of my loss and Nancy's relentless interference. Kyle grew more withdrawn, leaving me to navigate my grief alone. One night, I overheard Nancy and Kyle talking in hushed tones in the living room. Curiosity and anger pushed me to eavesdrop. We need to consider other options, Kyle, Nancy was saying. What do you mean? Kyle asked, his voice tired. Diana, she replied simply. She's still willing to be part of this family, to give you a child. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could Nancy be so heartless? That's enough, I said, stepping into the room. I won't let you replace me like this. Nancy turned to me, her eyes cold. Sharon, you need to think practically. This is about the future. No, Nancy, I said, my voice trembling with anger. This is about your manipulation and control. You've already taken so much from me. I won't let you take Kyle too. Kyle looked helpless, caught between us. Sharon, it's not what you think. Isn't it? I shot back. You're discussing replacing me with Diana as if I'm some disposable object. Nancy stood up, her face a mask of determination. You're being emotional. We need to move forward. No, I said firmly. If you continue down this path, you'll lose everything. This family isn't your puppet to control. Kyle finally spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. Mom, Sharon's right. We need to focus on healing, not on Diana or the guest house or any of your plans. Nancy's eyes flashed with anger, but she held her tongue. She turned and left without another word. Kyle walked over to me, putting his arms around me. I'm sorry, Sharon. I should have stood up to her sooner. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I nodded. We need to be a team, Kyle. We need to fight for us. He held me tighter, a glimmer of hope sparking in the darkness. I promise, Sharon, we'll get through this together. Despite my pain, a new resolve formed. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Nancy's manipulations had pushed us to the brink, but we would stand firm. The fight for our future had only just begun. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house became a constant presence. Kyle and I tried to rebuild our lives, but Nancy's presence was an ever-looming shadow. One evening, as I walked past the study, I heard voices. Curious, I paused. Mom, this isn't the right time, Kyle was saying. Time is exactly what we don't have, Nancy replied sharply. Sharon isn't going to have another child, Kyle. We need to think about the future. My heart sank. She was relentless. We need to give her some space, Mom, Kyle replied, but his voice lacked conviction. No, we need to act now. Diana is ready to step in. She's been discreet, waiting in the wings, Nancy insisted. I couldn't listen any longer. I pushed open the door, anger boiling over. How dare you, Nancy? How dare you plot behind my back? Nancy turned to me, her face a cold mask. Sharon, you need to accept reality. You can't provide what this family needs. I won't let you replace me, I said, my voice trembling with fury. This is my home, my marriage. Kyle looked stricken, caught between us again. Sharon, please. No, Kyle, I interrupted. Your mother needs to understand that I won't be pushed out of the way. Nancy stepped forward, her eyes glinting with malice. You're being irrational, Sharon. This is about family legacy, something you clearly don't understand. I understand perfectly, I shot back. You're using Diana to manipulate this family for your own ends. She's what's best for this family, Nancy insisted. No, I said, my voice firm. Family is about love and support, not control and manipulation. You've poisoned this household with your schemes. Kyle finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Mom, Sharon's right. We need to stop this. Nancy's face twisted with anger. You're making a mistake, Kyle. A mistake that will destroy everything we've built. I'd rather lose everything than keep living like this, Kyle said, his voice gaining strength. Sharon and I will handle our lives without your interference. Nancy glared at him, then at me. You'll regret this, both of you. She stormed out, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. I turned to Kyle, tears in my eyes. Thank you. He nodded, his face a mix of sorrow and resolve. It's time we take control of our lives, Sharon. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't continue living under Nancy's shadow. I needed to reclaim my independence and build a future free from her manipulations. Kyle, I think it's time we took a break, I said, my heart heavy but determined. He looked at me, pain in his eyes. Sharon, are you sure? Yes, I replied, my voice unwavering. I need to find myself again, to rebuild my life on my own terms. Kyle nodded slowly. I understand. I'll support you, whatever you need. As I packed my things, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for what could have been, but relief that I was finally taking a stand. When I left the house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I called my best friend Jessica, who immediately offered her support. Sharon, you're doing the right thing. You need to focus on yourself now. That night, as I lay in a small apartment far from the mansion's oppressive walls, I felt a spark of hope. Nancy might have thought she had won, but this was far from over. I vowed to reclaim what was mine, to expose Nancy's deceit, and to rebuild my life on my own terms. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready for the battle ahead. I spent the next few days regrouping at Jessica's place. Over coffee, I laid out everything that had happened. Jessica listened, her expression growing more concerned with each word. Sharon, it's time you took action, she said firmly. Nancy's hold over Kyle and their family is toxic. We need a plan. Jessica introduced me to Brandon Wilson, a sharp-eyed lawyer known for his no-nonsense approach. We met at his office, where he leaned back in his chair, studying me intently. So, tell me everything, he said. I relayed the whole saga, the incessant manipulations, the betrayal, and Nancy's schemes. Brandon took notes, his expression serious. Sharon, you have a solid case, he said finally. But to make this work, we need evidence of Nancy's manipulations, especially if they've impacted the family's finances. I nodded, determined. Tell me what to do. Over the next few weeks, we gathered evidence. I reached out to old friends and acquaintances, piecing together a pattern of Nancy's control over the family and their wealth. Jessica helped me navigate through the emotional toll, her unwavering support a lifeline. The breaking point came one afternoon when I discovered documents revealing Nancy had funneled family funds into personal accounts under Diana's name. Armed with this crucial evidence, we prepared for the legal battle ahead. The day of the confrontation arrived. Brandon and I walked into the Bensons' estate, documents in hand. Nancy, Kyle, and Diana were already there, their expressions a mix of curiosity and irritation. Nancy sneered as we entered. What is this all about, Sharon? Brandon stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. We're here to discuss the misappropriation of family funds and the manipulations perpetrated by you, Nancy. The room fell silent. Nancy's face twisted in anger. This is absurd, she spat. How dare you accuse me? We have proof, Brandon said, laying out the documents on the table. records of financial transactions, testimonies from people who've witnessed your manipulations. You've been siphoning funds and using Diana to secure your hold over the family. Kyle's face paled as he scanned the documents. Mom, what is this? Nancy glared at me. This is a setup. She's trying to destroy us. No, Nancy, I said, my voice clear and steady. I'm trying to reclaim what's rightfully mine and expose your deceit. You've manipulated this family for too long. Kyle stumbled back, his world unraveling. I can't believe this. Mom, how could you? Nancy's facade finally cracked. I did it for you, for the family. At what cost? Kyle shouted, anger and betrayal flashing in his eyes. You've destroyed everything. Diana quietly slipped out, not wanting to be part of the downfall. Brandon gathered the documents, his expression satisfied. This will hold up in court. Nancy slumped into a chair, deflated. This wasn't supposed to happen. Kyle turned to me, his eyes filled with regret. Sharon, I'm so sorry. I should have seen through her lies. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. We have a long road ahead, Kyle, but we can rebuild. The legal battle that followed was intense. However, with Brandon's expertise and the irrefutable evidence, Nancy's hold over the family crumbled. The truth about her manipulations and misdeeds came to light, and she faced the consequences. Kyle and I began to see glimmers of a future free from Nancy's influence. It wasn't easy, and the pain from past wounds lingered, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. As I walked out of the courthouse one final time, the sun shining brighter than it had in months, I felt a renewed sense of strength. The battle wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and the future I deserved. And for the first time, that future looked promising. The courtroom was buzzing with whispers as the judge called the session to order. Every bench was filled, curious eyes trained on our little drama. Nancy sat beside her lawyer, her face a mask of defiance. Kyle and I sat together, a unified front, ready to face whatever came our way. The judge looked at the gathered documents and then at Nancy. The evidence presented is quite damning, Mrs. Benson. You've manipulated not only your family's finances, but also their lives. How do you respond? Nancy's lawyer stood, trying to draw the conversation in a different direction. Your Honor, my client has always acted in the best interest of her family. These accusations are exaggerated. Brandon rose smoothly, placing another document before the judge. Your Honor, these aren't exaggerated claims. We have clear evidence of where the family money has gone. Mrs. Benson used her position to control and manipulate her son's family for her personal gain. Nancy glared at me, venom in her gaze. This is your doing, Sharon. You've always been weak, and now you're trying to ruin us. I felt a rush of anger, but kept my voice calm. No, Nancy, the truth is ruining you. Your deeds are finally coming to light. The judge signaled for silence and reviewed the documents again. It appears the evidence is irrefutable. In light of these findings, this court rules in favor of Sharon Benson. Nancy Benson, you will be held accountable for your actions, including the financial restitution required. Nancy's face twisted in outrage. This isn't over, she hissed, glaring at me. You may have won this battle, but I won't let you ruin this family. Kyle, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. Mom, it's over. You need to accept the consequences of your actions. Stop this madness. Nancy looked at Kyle, her fury mixing with disbelief. You're siding with her? I'm siding with the truth, Kyle replied firmly. And it's time we all faced it. As we exited the courtroom, the media swarmed around us, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. Brandon guided us through the crowd, but not before I caught a glimpse of Nancy's face, a mixture of rage and defeat. The public reaction was swift. News of Nancy's manipulations spread through Pasadena's social circles like wildfire. Her fall from grace was rapid, ostracizing her from the society she once controlled with an iron fist. Days turned into weeks, with a mix of, and the shockwaves of the trial continued to ripple. I received messages of support, people who had seen the news and admired my stand. For the first time in a long while, I felt a community rallying around me instead of alienating me. One evening, Kyle and I sat in the living room of our now quieter home. How are you holding up? He asked, concern in his eyes. I'm okay, I replied truthfully. For the first time in a while, I feel like I can breathe. Kyle nodded. I'm sorry for everything, Sharon, for not seeing through Mom earlier, for not standing by you. I reached out and took his hand. We can't change the past, Kyle, but we can build a better future, together. He smiled, relief evident on his face. I'd like that. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. I opened it to find Diana standing there, looking nervous. Diana? I asked, surprised. I just wanted to say goodbye, she said, shifting uneasily. I'm leaving Pasadena. I can't stay here with everything that's happened. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. Take care, Diana. I hope you find peace. She gave a small smile and walked away, another piece of the past finally letting go. As I closed the door, I felt lighter, free from the chains of manipulation and deceit that had bound me for so long. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. With the truth on our side, we could face anything. The shadows that once loomed over us were finally starting to lift, revealing a brighter, more hopeful horizon. The sun streamed through the windows of my new office, a cozy space I'd rented to start my own business, a small consulting firm specializing in helping women navigate marital and financial disputes. It felt good to be here, surrounded by supportive friends and colleagues, away from the toxic environment that had once suffocated me. Jessica walked in, a box of files in her hands. Sharon, you have a visitor, she said, her tone curious. Who is it? I asked, looking up from my desk. It's Nancy, Jessica replied, her eyes filled with concern. I felt a pang of anxiety but steadied myself. Let her in. Nancy entered, her once commanding presence diminished. She looked smaller, almost fragile. Sharon, I came to talk, she said, her voice lacking its usual venom. Go ahead, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I came to apologize, she began, her eyes avoiding mine. I never saw the damage I was causing. I thought I was protecting the family. I studied her, looking for sincerity. Nancy, you caused a lot of pain, not just to me, but to Kyle and our unborn child. Apologies are a start, but they won't erase the past. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I know. I've lost so much, my reputation, my family's trust. I just want to make amends. I took a deep breath. Nancy, making amends means accepting responsibility and letting go of control. Can you do that? She hesitated, but then nodded. I'm willing to try. I want to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with Kyle, and maybe, over time, with you too. I appreciate that, I said, feeling the weight of her words, but also understanding that trust would take time. Let's take it one step at a time. Nancy offered a weak smile. Thank you, Sharon. I'll let you get back to your work. After she left, Jessica came back in. That was unexpected, she remarked. Very, I agreed, but it felt like closure. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to return to a new normal. Kyle and I worked hard to rebuild our relationship, focusing on open communication and mutual respect. Nancy kept her distance but made genuine efforts to change, attending therapy and slowly rebuilding trust with Kyle. One sunny afternoon, I received a call from Rebecca, Kyle's and my mutual friend. Sharon, I just wanted to say how proud I am of you, she said. You've become such a strong, independent woman. Everyone in Pasadena is talking about you, in a good way. Thank you, Rebecca, I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. It means a lot. Kyle and I decided to host a small gathering to celebrate newfound peace and growth. Friends and family filled our home, laughter and conversation flowing easily. It felt surreal, but wonderful. At one point, I found myself standing alone, looking out into the garden. Kyle joined me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. We've come a long way, haven't we? We have, I agreed, leaning into him. I'm proud of us. Jessica raised her glass for a toast. To Sharon and Kyle, for showing us that with truth, resilience, and love, we can overcome anything. The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. The shadows of the past had lifted, replaced by the light of a hopeful future. As the evening wound down, Kyle and I stood side by side, watching our friends and family. Here's to new beginnings, I said softly. To new beginnings, Kyle echoed, squeezing my hand. The journey had been long and painful, but standing there among the people who truly cared for us, I knew we were finally free. We had risen above the manipulations and betrayals, and now the future was ours to shape, and it was looking bright.